told me to do that. Okay, sorry. All
No.
the introduction, it was all introductions up to here, no content missed.
Okay, thanks, Chet. Just brief recap for the recording. The first agenda item was just a status update to the PGB on the action that we had to transition the Indicators of Behaviors Working Group into a project, and that is now complete. The vote passed, and they have already published their first code artifacts. So I'll post a link here in the chat. I didn't really plan on like showing anything, screen share, demo, or anything, but I would recommend that you take a few minutes out of your day and circulate to your team, perhaps, this repository and the great work that's been shared there. So they have this really cool project to translate and visualize sticks2 artifacts using Neo4j, and they have this whole reference implementation for indicators of behavior, and there's going to be more things published there as well. So a lot of this is coming out of the crew down at Johns Hopkins, and the fantastic Charlie Frick, who's been leading this working group. So a lot of good stuff, hopefully, to come out of that. And I see Duncan has his hand raised, so I'll hand the mic for a second.
Thanks, Jason. Just 2 points. One, it's really good news. It's really great work. I think, Chet, if you could take an action back to OASIS staff, I think they should make a PR thing, a press release on it. I think it's a big deal. So that's the good news part. The sort of nit, because as you know, I'm a nit person and always bring up nits, is it's actually now a sub-project called a working group, or is its name a sub-project? Because it's sort of weird. Right now, it's worded as it's a sub-project with the name working group. Over.
It should, Duncan. It should be. We didn't change the name on the repo. It had -WG, and the email list had -WG. We left it as -WG, but Claudia was, I believe, making sure that all of the display information had working group taken off. I just didn't want to break links by changing.
No, I'm fine with the WG being in the thing. It's just, it should be clear it's a sub-project, because the rules are different and they are now allowed to actually do stuff. So we want to keep it that they can do stuff. But yeah, the more important thing is if you could get a press release out about it, I think it would be great.
I'll follow up with Mary Beth on that.
Yeah, and I think that we actually did rename the repo, and Alex is saying here in the chat, GitHub actually does that really well, and I assume Claudia knows what she's doing. I think she did it properly, so it will do the redirect for you. So if you go to that, you can actually see the link I posted in the chat. The WG has been removed now, Duncan. So it has been updated in a couple places at least.
You might want to check the charter. I think the charter still calls it.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can, I mean, we could take an action to go and make sure that everything's up to date, but it's a good point. So that was the first item on the agenda. Just wanted to raise awareness of that great work, and now that they have a repo, I think there's a lot of opportunity to publish some great work in there, not only from JHU, but perhaps some other contributors as well, because that is one of the kind of working groups that's going very much across our industry, which is fantastic, and raising awareness for what we're doing here. All right. So second item I wanted to cover on the agenda was some more awareness sharing of actually some big news that happened this week, right? So as folks may or may not be aware, AWS is having their big conference right now. It's called AWS reInvent. And a couple of days, and as part of that conference yesterday, they actually announced this big new cybersecurity initiative called the Amazon Security Lake. And it's something they're going to be pushing a lot of their partners and things to utilize and make use of. So AWS, they're a pretty big elephant, and as such, they have an outsized impact on the industry, as you can expect. So this is a pretty big deal. The reason this is relevant to the OCA is because this lake is using that format called the Open Cybersecurity Schema format that we talked about a couple of months ago, that we have gone and added to the Stick Shifter and Kestrel projects already. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone's aware of this because this is going to be coming up. I suspect well, it already made the press release rounds yesterday, but you're probably going to be hearing about it more and more in various different groups like, oh, what's Amazon doing? You know, you now have the opportunity to always interject into those as well and say, hey, we're already on this with the OCA. It's already working. And it actually kind of goes to show the value of what we're trying to achieve here, right? That when these things happen, it's really easy to go in and add another adapter, and then the whole framework continues to work, right? So the stuff that Charlie's group is doing continues to work. The stuff that we're doing with Kestrel continues to work, and you don't have to hit pause and decide, oh, what does this mean for us? Because by using open standards and open source to enable those open standards, it greatly helps with that problem. So I just wanted to raise awareness of that's going on. Again, because they do have an outsized impact, and people will probably be hearing about this. Any quick questions on that? If not, I can move to the next agenda item. No, okay. Next item we wanted to cover off here is just an update on this proposal to have the cybersecurity automation workshop move to the OCA, either perhaps as a working group, or is it a project? What is it? Is it some new construct? A little bit unclear, but that is a proposal that Duncan has put forward. I'll hand you the mic in a sec, Duncan, but he emailed out to the mailing list a lot of details on this about a half hour ago. So I would recommend taking a look through that, reading through what was proposed, and then we can, Duncan's suggestion was that we can, get back together to discuss in early January, if I'm correctly understanding. But Duncan, I'll hand the mic over to you here, and you can correct me if I'm mistaken.
Thanks, Jason. No, yep, you got it pretty close. Again, the email went out recently. For those of you who aren't PGB members, the PGB mailing list is an open mailing list, so you can find it there, but you can sort of skip right to the proposal. And so the draft charter is in a GitHub repo for the computer automation, cybersecurity automation workshop. The proposal for the new draft charter is on its website because it pre-existed. We're proposing basically to move it into the OCA. There's sort of two related pages to it, one just on FAQs and one on some example topics. On the topic of, is it a sub-project or is it a work group? I am proposing that it do be a sub-project, so we don't have to go through what IOB just went through and get converted from being a working group to a sub-project, with the main difference being sub-projects can have output. Working groups can't. They're just discussion groups. And because there already is an output that's being brought in, which is the website from the previous cybersecurity automation workshops, and the assumption is the website would be part of the work and be updated. The proposal is it would be a sub-project, which I also think is better because I did include within the scope, it could potentially make standards tracked work products. The current focus to begin with will be on the workshop, but there is at least a possibility it would come up with standard tracks work products and some examples of what, for example, we might want to do or in one of those subtending pages. The proposal is not to discuss it at length here, just to let you be aware of it. The proposal is we sort of have it out there on GitHub for people to either comment to the PGB list or preferably make pull requests against the GitHub repo if you want to make any changes to the charter or the FAQs or anything else. That we sort of keep it in that state till 1 week before our next meeting. At 1 week before our next meeting, we'd put it out for e-ballot for a week. That would still be open as of our next meeting, just so that way at the meeting we could remind people, hey, you haven't voted yet, would you vote? And then hopefully it would pass, and if it doesn't pass, we could discuss it at the meeting and vote from there. But the proposal is sort of get it out there for comment for the next 3-ish weeks, and then vote on it for 1-ish weeks, and then we would have it be a project also. Over.
Thanks, Duncan. So, I'll just make a quick comment and then, if anyone has any questions. So, for folks who may or may not be totally in tune with what this is, right? Because we didn't really explain. So cybersecurity automation workshops, it's an event that Duncan has actually been heroically running almost by himself for the past couple of years. It's actually a quite popular event, I would say, and it has a moderate profile, especially in U.S. federal circles. It tends to gather a crowd from NSA, DoD, NIST, not to mention industry folks from AT&T and others, and it is a pretty it's a significant event, traces back to the IACD days for anyone who's familiar with the IACD work that went on a few years ago. So, essentially the proposal is, to take the concept and branding and motion around cybersecurity automation workshop and make it not just a Duncan thing, but a thing that we as the OCA kind of organize, help run, and align with other things going on both here and other Oasis projects. So that's for folks kind of like, what the heck are you guys talking about? That's a little bit more background.
And if you go to the website where the charter is and sort of go up one level, so take the OCA off the end of it, you'll see basically the website from the last workshop last June. There were over 100 participants from around the world. A lot of interworking between the various cybersecurity automation standards. So yeah, pretty big deal. And I'd like some help. And this makes it sort of more official than Duncan's pet project.
So yeah, I mean, strongly encourage everyone to go take a look at the links that were shared. There's some here in Zoom. There was also some emailed earlier as we discussed, and I agree with the whole proposal plan. So unless anybody has any objections they want to raise now, I think we'll go ahead with that. We'll open that ballot, leave it, make sure it overlaps with the meeting so that people can, both raise any concerns in person, and also we can poke people to remind them to vote in case they didn't. So any questions or concerns with that approach for anyone on the call?
I guess my only thought is making it a project. I don't know what code would be produced outside of the individual components that are each projects unto themselves. And from my perspective, it seems more of I'm fully supportive of it. Just whether it's a project or whether it's a working group or whether it's just us taking up the mantle and it's a marketing part of OCA marketing to organize the workshops.
I mean, there could be code. Because there's test harnesses and other things that are created. So that would be one thing. And I see Chet's got his hand up here. I hand it to him in a second. But I mean, the other thing I would say, and Duncan kind of highlighted this a little bit, is it's not necessarily just about code. It's more about IP rights, right? And the reason that you want to create it as a sub-project is so that any of the IP that comes out of it as well is protected. So like right now there's a website. So, in theory, or like branding and logos and stuff, like you don't want us to do this and then take on cybersecurity automation workshop, make a logo, and then Duncan decides, hey, I could make a couple $1 million doing this privately, and then he'll go and copy everything, and not that would happen, but just the whole point is to protect the IP, and IP is not just code. So Chet, did you have any other feedback on that?
Sense.
Or I saw your hand up. You're on mute, Chet.
That's all I was going to say was that because the working groups don't make any of the CLAs or any of the other IP commitments, that's why they have to be just talking groups. And making it a project then means that people can contribute any kind of material under the CLA, and so it protects us, it protects the open project, and it protects them.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I do I get where you're coming from, Mark, too, in that this is, if we do this, if it goes forward, it is kind of it's a very different project, because like we're talking about a project that's running events. So, you know, I think there's some interesting things that will, you know, if this goes through, you know, hopefully it does. If it goes through, I think, you know, an interesting aspect of this to me is like, what role does the marketing committee, subcommittee have in this project? In a way, they should almost be one of the primary stewards of it, right? Because
Mhm.
it's an event, not a code, right? So hopefully the marketing committee is very heavily involved, right? So there's some things like that that would need to be thought through, I think.
Yeah, but it's not just marketing being the geek of the crowd. It's more like, you know, for example, the Kestrel and OpenC2 groups are working together and actually doing interworking and getting their stuff to work together. This is a forum to do that on sort of a wider scale, not just that combo, but the 16 other pairwise combos that are in the proposal. And that's really what the workshops did in the past, is they sort of got all the different piece parts together in the room to work together. And there is some potential for actual code to come out of it, because again, not just the test harnesses, but well, I guess it's a type of test harness, but the sort of, well, conformance is probably overstating it, but that's the word I used in the things. But how to get the stuff to actually work together. It might be the spec gives you 97 options, and we say, yeah, let's narrow it down to, at least when we're talking together, use these 3 or whatever.
Yes, so I think the way you described that, Duncan, it totally makes sense. I just wonder if it makes sense if that output from the workshop, does it make sense for that to be aligned to a workshop repository in GitHub? Or, you know, and I would ask Xiaoquei this, like, you know, if there's something related to Kestrel produced in the workshop, it probably should go to the Kestrel repo. If there's something related to OpenC2 developed in the workshop, it should probably go to OpenC2. If there's an intermediate repository and there's work on interoperability, which is the purpose of the entire OCA, that is going to be produced, does it make sense to have that, you know, buried, for lack of better words, like in a workshop repo, or something more obvious that is interop tools between different projects?
But that repo would still have to, in fact, that is the reason for forming it, so we can make that repo.
Okay, then maybe we just need to work on the naming of the
And I
project.
took workshop, by the way, out. If you actually look at the proposal, I took workshop out of the name. It's the
Okay.
computer automation sub-project of OCA. So therefore it's CASP. It also makes an acronym you can say, CASP.
Just what we needed.
Well, it's better than CAW.
Okay.
See, the workshop's acronym is CAW, and I don't like CAW.
Yeah, it sounds like a bird. CASP is better than CAW for sure.
Okay. All right, well, let's
Yeah,
think about it. We'll talk more
I
offline,
think
but-
we can flesh. Yeah, I think the nuances of some of this we'll definitely need to figure out how we want to do. I agree with what you're saying too, Mark. Like, you know, I think we're gonna have to come up with, and I don't think necessarily either we have to have hard and fast policies or rules. I think we can also use judgment, right, around, you know, when people make these artifacts. If it's, for example, you know, if as part of the workshop, one of the test cases is a new Kestrel hunt book, you know, to your point, it makes a lot more sense to put that in the existing hunt books repo than, you know, buried somewhere else. And GitHub lets you, you know, we can have linkages, right?
Yeah.
So
And by the
I
way,
think we
in
can
the
work
previous
through.
3 workshops, exactly what you said is exactly what happened. The OpenC2 stuff was in OpenC2, the Cacao stuff was in Cacao, and the stuff that went across them was what actually ended up in the workshop one. If you go look at what's in, for example, the use cases from the previous workshop, some of the use cases just say, you know, go see Kestrel, go see OpenC2, go see Cacao, and some of them put them all together and are unique and do go there. So in other words, the piece parts were in the respective repos, but to sort of put it all together was on the workshop repo. And again, it's just an attempt to try and put it all together somewhere. And it's not an attempt to take anything over. It's even written in the charter. We're not going to write any new standards if one already exists. It does
All
leave open, it does leave open the possibility of writing new specifications if more to glue the stuff together than to replace something that's there.
All right, I think I'm gonna call time on this
Yep.
topic because we're at the halfway point. And I just had one more item to see if we quickly get out of the way before we hand the mic over to Richard and Alex and the team there. So the last item I wanted to cover on the agenda is around blog policy. So this is an interesting, I think this will be an interesting conversation, but hopefully, you know, also, I don't want to take up a huge amount of time. So I'm going to raise the issue of concern. If there's any quick comments we can discuss. Other than that, let's take it out of band, perhaps to the mailing list. So a question recently came up this past week. You know, a group that IBM is actually working with did some cool work around and related to Kestrel, and that organization wanted to publish a blog on the project, the Kestrel project. This is open source, open and free, but this company is not an OCA member, right? They're not a PGB member. And that kind of opened up the question, what is our policy around blogs? You know, do we want third parties to be able to submit things that are related to our projects to be posted on our blog? Or is the blog only for PGB members as part of the benefits, you know, part of what you get as a member of OCA is you're able to, you know, publish on the blog. So I think it was an interesting question. It's actually not covered in any OASIS open project rules. It's not covered in our policy. It's something we've just never defined. So, you know, I wanted to raise it to the PGB, see what people's thoughts are. You know, because I have no strong opinions one way or the other on this. I did speak to Carol Geyer at OASIS on it. You know, she was leaning a little bit more towards, I think that the blog should be only reserved for members. You know, there's pros and cons to both, right? Because on one hand, you're trying to get more engagement and involvement with the community. And on the other hand, you know, we definitely do want to make sure that sponsors have the right amount of profile. So I saw Duncan thinks that it should be PGB only and members can reblog other content. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. The link to the OCA blog is just, so if you go to opencybersecurityalliance.org, there's a news link at the top, and that's the blog I'm talking about. So any other quick comments or thoughts on that? You know, I want to make sure we have time for this ontology discussion, so I don't want to go into a huge rabbit hole. But that's kind of the topic, and I might send an email out about this after the call and just get more thoughts on it, so that, you know, maybe in January we can decide what we think the official policy should be. Any other thoughts or comments on that?
I would lean to keep it open. I think, you know, all press is good press, as they say. You know, I think there are other benefits in taking part in events, obviously voting, etc. And until we have a problem where we need to pull back who's allowed to submit to the blog, I mean, we need some sort of curation process. We can't just have it wide open, obviously.
Well, yeah, I mean, the good news is right now, like, there's no official submission, you know, it's kind of like go through Claudia. So there's a very clear gate, which is good. But kind of like so what happened here was these folks contacted Claudia, and she like kind of contacted me. She's like, what do I do with this? I'm like, well, I don't know. We gotta discuss it. Because there's no actual rule on this.
Yeah.
So anyway, so it sounds like we've got one, you know, kind of one vote for, one vote against. I'm pretty neutral. So I think we'll
Oliver,
send
you're a
an email.
professional marketeer. You have an opinion?
Well, I was just gonna say, if it's a news blog, news would tend to be public and open, I would think, but there should be a members blog if you're gonna have something like that. In other words, where,
That's a good idea.
yeah, if you're gonna have members space and they need to talk about things, and they can do that there. But if it's general news, you know, it's like press release kind of stuff, that should be kind of open and let folks publish to that, not necessarily freely, but with a lot less hassle, I guess.
Yeah, just Jason, this is Jane. I'm just jumping in real quick. I think the biggest struggle that we find ourselves with is content updates. So if we close this down to just sponsors, we have to get a commitment from them that they will submit something, let's say every month kind of thing, because you don't want it to be stale. And so I think that's the struggle that we have, is to make sure that the content is, you know, changing and you know, updating and so forth and so on. So just wanted to throw those 2 cents in for consideration.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. And that kind of leads more towards what Mark was saying is, you know, all news, but good to have a fresh one. I think it's an interesting thing. So Duncan, I see you got your hand up. This will be the last one, and then I want to go to the ontology thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's too high a bar that at least one member has to say, hey, why don't you blog about this or something, or we support the non-member. You know, IBM supports the whoever wrote the blog you're talking about. I mean, it sounds like, Jason, you would support that particular one. You just got to say, hey, yeah, I agree that that one's appropriate, and that some member of the PGB says it's appropriate. And yes, that means some member of the PGB could blog about something random, but that could happen now. And again, we can police ourselves because we're all on the PGB. We can't police people outside it. So I think we'd all be responsible that way. Now, to Jane's point is, hey, you don't want it to be stale, then yeah, we're not doing our job if we got to provide more content. Jane, you came on late. I already provided some content earlier in the call that I think you should be sending out about one of Jason's announcements. But yeah, I mean, I just don't think, I think we have to be careful to not open it too wide, but the current concern is there's not enough. So we just walk the path of, hey, everybody here's got a responsibility to do something, and let's do, you know, maybe the easiest thing to do is to find something of somebody else's to blog, but it's got something to do with OCA, and some one of us said, yeah, it's okay. It doesn't have to be a majority.
So well, let's do this. I just, sorry to cut you off, Doug. I want to make sure we have time for the group that joined us here. Let's table this for now. And I would actually like to propose that this is something the marketing committee should also take up, and give a strong, you know, maybe this is something that an action we can actually get them to have something, because they've been, you know, having a little bit of a struggle getting actionable meeting attendance and stuff. So and I see Paige Paige said that she'd support that idea to provide content as well. So let's table it for now. I'll send in an email to both the PGB, the marketing, about the situation and the ask, and we'll see where it goes from there. All right. So Richard, Alex, I'm not sure how you wanted to go about this, who's leading the discussion, but I'll hand it over to you guys.
That'd be Alex here. I was looking for Ian and I didn't see him. I tried to contact him in the background. So I'm not part of the ontology group for the most part. I just replaced Dr. Hare on this board here. So I'll be quiet and turn it over to Alex.
Yep. And you predated me, unfortunate. So my interaction with the group, and I'm going to be leading the introduction because Ian's stuck in a meeting. I came in to assist with a comparative representation that the group Ian and Forrest are more involved with, subgroup, working group, or however you guys are calling it. They have a scenario that is a fairly cut and dry spearfishing incident that is imaginary data. Like, it doesn't involve actual people, but a real tool provided data to monitor a system for a simulated event. And the tool vendor sent that data around as a JSON dump. And the Ian and Forrest took on trying to represent it in an ontology framework based on the Common Core ontology and basic foundational ontology, which is more used in the biomedical sciences. Case and UCO got involved with this group. I actually don't know when, but I was brought in after a few meetings. Sorry. So what I'm doing is I write a lot of the example data for the case and UCO ontologies, and I also wrote the validation framework and semi-static rendering content for the groups. I left a link in chat for the place where we are housing our implementation of the scenario using case using case and UCO, our languages. Both parties knew both the cyber domain ontology side and the Common Core ontology side. We both knew that we would both have representation gaps with the relationships between the nodes in the graph, which you can see following that link in the README to their PowerPoint. There's a PowerPoint, a spreadsheet for a lot of the metadata, which gets to the representation questions that start whenever you come to a new data format, like, okay, how do y'all represent a hash of a file? So there is a exercise that Ian and Forrest have done, but I don't think they've posted anywhere yet. Wish they were around to correct me or not. Our side of representation, we have our data in our properties populated for the majority of the spreadsheet contents, except for I think 2 rows or something, using case and UCO. There are some things that we haven't really exercised with, say, role interactions with actors in the scenario that I turn to the provenance ontology for. So for the sake of timelining, I went through and sketched by hand how everything relates in terms of a complete other third-party ontology, W3C prov, W3C time. They have a definition of how to align those two ontologies, but I'm going to talk about timelines and talk about how entities came to be and the activities that generated them. So if you're talking about a flow of artifacts within a scenario, prov is a language that could be used, kind of abused, to represent how some things came to be. But from a discussion this morning with Sean Bardham, who, sorry, had to leave for schedule, I can acknowledge. He's of the opinion that there's an alternative mechanism to represent what happens in the real scenario that you're trying to model in the ontology. Provo might be a bit of an abuse of that, but it's a starting point for taking how an incident responder would look at the case and say, okay, we had a triggering event. I need to work backwards in time from the triggering event to try to reconstruct what happened. I use Prov as a destination test format to test my story that I get out of the analysis. So at the end of this, there is a automatically generated Prov translation from case that can go back into what I've typed by hand for the most part. This is all kinds of cross coverage analysis, not only between Common Core ontology and CDO, cyber domain ontology, but between CDO and its objectives with some other ontologies that's trying to do as a test that it can actually function as a mid-level ontology and port from a basis that's, say, on BFO, where most of the scenario was imagined, and probably going over to the unified foundational ontology, another top-level ontology that will butt heads immediately with BFO if you ever try to bring them both into the same ecosystem. UCO, case, CDO, we all try to stay mid-level, and we're trying to, and this scenario is a nice cross-community collaboration to see how well we can do as a mid-level ontology, or if we're going to just completely step off a cliff somewhere. We like exercising things and finding the worst ideas you could possibly express to them to see if there's a language defect we need to address. So that's my overview for the data. If you look at the all the files with the word validation, then those are unit testing files, making sure that things are conformant with our ontology as implemented in Shackle and Owl. The other files, the JSON and Turtle are mechanically translated between one another. The prov file is hand typed. Everything's normalized with a Java library. Otherwise, this is a mostly artisanal piece of data for us to see how the scenario would play out using a couple different representational languages. So that was my 5-minute plus overview. I'm happy to answer questions.
So I have a couple questions to start off, I guess. So just taking a step back a little bit, is the, so one of the things that I'm trying to unpack, assume that I'm a layman, because I am in this world. So we have the case ontology, and then we have the UCO ontology. Is UCO a subset of NEAM?
No,
Or like, what is the relation to NEAM between the, or is that a third?
that's a third.
That's a third. Okay, great.
NEAM is completely independent. We looked to borrow some of their ideas, but because we only saw them implemented as an XML schema, we would have had to RDFify their ideas in order to do that. It's been on the agenda for a while, but no, we don't have a formal relation with NEAM.
So that might be an interesting, that might be an interesting follow-up, because I'm sure Chet and the Oasis team can help make that, since NEAM is now an Oasis project. We could definitely help build those bridges. Is one of the goals, right? So with what you're with what's going on here, so you're in the first stages. You're beyond comparing, so I don't like to use, I'm just going to use that word anyway. Compare case to UCO and bridging them with this sample use case, the spearfishing use case. Is the end goal to, because I'm not aware of who all the different downstream consumers are of case versus UCO. I don't know if you could speak to that for a minute or two. Like, is the end goal to try to bring these together, or make them compatible? I'm just trying to figure out what the end goal is. Does that make sense?
Our current goal is seeing where we have mutual coverage gaps. Philosophically, the Common Core ontology and CDO don't have a symmetric relationship with one another. CDO could take on CCO as a foundational layer because CCO is built on the basic foundational ontology. But one of the reasons, case UCO, CDO, one of the reasons they stay away from foundational ontologies is once you do lock onto one foundational ontology, you no longer are able to interoperate with any other one. A BFO ontology cannot interoperate with a UFO ontology. And there's reasons some downstream consumers would want to go with either that are completely legitimate. And unfortunately, once you pick one foundational ontology, you only get one foundation. So that's one reason CDOs try to stay away from being a side picker in the foundational ontology space. Common Core ontology, as a BFO adopter, gets all the value of some of its inter-object relationships, but to my understanding, which is not at all authoritative, they haven't done as much fleshing out of the space of observable objects in cyberspace. So we know that at least CCO is going to be learning about some things that are maybe embarrassing gaps. Oh, we really need to get a property for that, and let's see how some other folks have made it work. So we see this as a mutually beneficial exercise in terms of, you can do this, I can't, I would like to learn how, going both ways.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So it's you're using the OCA artifact as a vector for knowledge sharing and making both of them better. It's not so much about bringing them together as closing the gaps on both sides.
Right. We both
Sorry.
understood the value of your examples really improves the value of your ontology. And a
Right.
good cross-community example is a very impressive artifact to have.
You know, I see Duncan's got his hand up. Yeah, I mean, so I think one takeaway for me is we should try to figure out, you know, how to, you know, maybe bring the NEAM community in as the third in the working group, you know, using the example. Like how does this example map onto NEAM? I have no idea if anyone's even looked at it, right? So yeah, that could be an interesting follow-up. Duncan, do you have
Yeah, my
comment?
comment, because again, I always like giving other people work, was going to be almost identical. If you could include NEAM as your sort of third, hey, let's make everything better by looking how everybody compares. I think NEAM would benefit. I think Oasis would benefit because this whole moving NEAM into Oasis is going through lots of churn and figuring out how to do it. Because like I have some other contributions I want to make to NEAM and I can't figure out how to do it yet because we're still starting up. But I'll say NEAM Cyber is, in my opinion, the weakest of the 10 domains in NEAM. And so you probably get to steer a lot of it if you want to get involved in that. And if nothing else, you probably want to get involved in it because it's really, really common in government stuff outside of cyber, weirdly enough, for cyber stuff. So like in agriculture and law enforcement and intelligence, it's got quite a lot of use. And so particularly for the, I forgot your terminology right, for the common objects they've already defined, if you could use their common objects, if you haven't got one and need one, it would probably make life easier eventually, because it does seem to be what the US government uses to talk to other governments with. Over.
I have one question, Alex, since we've got you and you're an expert on this. One thing I've asked before related to ontology is kind of, you know, an example of how a distributed system can use an ontology, and are there any real world examples of, you know, systems being governed by an ontology?
Yes, I don't know of them. Sean Barnum has had experience with a previous employer that used a knowledge graph on the order of tens of billions of triples to orchestrate security incident response and automated analysis. He's no longer with the employer, but he's happy to talk about what he was able to do there. And as far as I've known, he's able to talk about it. So yes, there are systems that look for like consistency checks in world perspective from what your logs are showing. If suddenly you have some causality loops or inconsistencies in timestamps versus dependencies between objects, then that's the kind of thing that flags that gets flagged in a security system and leads to analysts getting down, taking a look. So yeah, the value of ontologies is being able to see if your view of the world is consistent based on raw translations from your logs. And if and there's a lot of first order logic based checks to do that kind of in the background, always churning away analysis.
Got it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Sorry, I was on mute. So what's the next step? What's the next steps here, Alex? You know, I guess two questions. What's the next step for the group? And you know, I know, you know, I believe you guys had some specific asks or ask because you know, Forrest wanted to get in front of us and had, I don't think it was just about an update. He had some asks about what, I'm not sure. So
I
leave that to you.
unfortunately,
Oh, you're not sure?
I don't know either. I am
Okay.
sorry. I don't know of this work of this group's workflow. For Forrest, Ian, and Owen and Sean and I, what we are doing next is illustrating the natural language questions we want to be able to answer with this data once both of our implementations are finished as best we can with our respective languages. But after the implementation, after the natural language questions are translated into our Sparkle queries, Sparkle SQL for graphs, once we've translated those, implemented them, shown you what our answers are in the graph, and how we have shown I like to show how we don't get wrong answers from those same queries. It's another piece of exercise in the ontologies, making sure they keep you from making overly broad statements and making bad actions on them. After that, my impression was then we would be coming to you to do a demonstration of value. And that's the end of what I can guess.
All right, well, that's fantastic. Any other thoughts? I think this is actually, it's interesting. This is like one of these projects that's kind of been toiling away in the background for actually quite some time. And this, what you just read out, and I'm trying to take a look through the artifacts here in the background. So I've got the PowerPoint open and I'm kind of browsing through. Yeah, it sounds like there's some really good progress made here. And, now that Neem is in sort of pseudo in the fold as well, there's maybe some even more exciting opportunity here. So, any other thoughts before we wrap? We're getting almost right up to time here.
Well, just one suggestion for the work group would be to work a little bit on your awareness and adoptions to the rest of us who aren't ontology geeks. Because like just looking at the website that you provided the link to, I did what Jason did. I went off to the use case link and I understood the use case link better than I understood your page. I understood it better with some of the words that you verbally put out on how we're comparing them, and it made both of them better. But those exact words about how we're, they're both better off because we compared them, don't actually like show up on your page anywhere. So that would be one suggestion.
I have delegated.
Would be to consider whether you want it to become a project, whether you want to make any outputs, whether it's just you want to continue, hey, let's just keep talking about this, or no, we actually think that, a year from now, 2 years from now, we want to have X as an output. And that's what you'd probably want to bring. That's for certain what you'd want to at least consider bringing to us so we could all go, yeah, go do that. Over.
Well, I think that's something we need to look more closely at, Duncan. Like, because what is the status? Because they already have repo here. It's already got a license.
Yes, we took the.
So are they a project? Are they a project or are they a work group?
Not a project, I don't think.
I think it is a project. It was one of the original projects.
Oh,
it was one of the original projects.
Yeah, it is a project, yes. So I'm back to my original statement. You are a project, you're allowed to. Just what do you want to come up with is sort of the, you're doing lots of good stuff. Do you want to come up with any outputs? And if the answer is yes, then propose them to us and we'll probably go great. But think about it in those terms would just be my only thing to ask.
I mean, for my own goals, one of the sibling demonstrations in this repository on cell towers, now called cell sites, that's the kind of exercise I want to be able to do with this graph that we're doing with the OCA example spearfishing. I want to be able to show the queries that we would run against the data, let people be able to play with the data on their own, and maybe run it against our broader data lake when we get that deployed. From my perspective, it's a good, well worked out example with demonstrations of functionality is what I'm going for. And then I'm done.
And again, we don't have to approve it here. I'm just saying, think about it and think about it not just from a, hey, yeah, you're going to make a spec or you're going to make some code. First off, you're going to make some code, then occasionally make releases of it so we could approve them, so we could write press releases about it and stuff like that. I'm thinking, think a little bit broader about its use and its awareness and adoption and what we could do to help with that, basically.
All right. Well, with that, we're at time. So, actually a perfectly timed call here. Um, and I think we've got a number of actions here from the meeting day. Great meeting, great update for everyone. Before we wrap, just a reminder, I sent it out in the email, but this is the last regularly scheduled call for 2022. So the next call, I think we're gonna have to take an out of band discussion on the email about the next call, because I'm gonna have to move to my next meeting, and I'm sure some others do as well. But we kind of need to look at the calendar, because I think right now, I don't think that the meetings continue into 2023. So I'm gonna have to create the calendar again. And I doubt that people want to meet on the first week of January. So we're probably gonna have to push it out into at least the second week of January. And we'll go from there. But yeah, if there is any, I don't see any immediate need, but if anyone has any, like, year-end wrap-up discussion, like, oh, we need to figure out this strategy for next year type of discussion, and you want to raise that to try to organize another call before the end of the year, I'm open to that. But as of right now, this is the last call. So, happy holidays to everybody preemptively, and we'll meet again next year, unless we have anything we want to discuss. So thanks everybody, and talk
Thanks,
to you later.
Jason. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.